So pipelines are awesome, right? There are no upfront costs. You can just start developing and you only pay for what you use. But what do you say if a project manager asks you, how much is this actually going to cost? Or do you have an estimate for this so we know how much to budget for? Is your answer to shrug and say, I don't really know, I guess we just have to wait for the next invoice? There is a better way. Welcome to Lessons Learned, Understanding Pipeline Pricing in Azure Data Factory and Azure Synapse Analytics. My name is Cathrine. My pronouns are she and her. I work for a company named Skill. And if you have any questions about this session after Data Minutes, you can find me on Twitter at CathrineW or through my blog, cathrinew.net. Pipeline pricing is divided into three main parts. We have operations, orchestration and execution, and data flows. Operations are pretty cheap, but everything has a cost. So inside of Azure Data Factory, operations are divided into two. The first are all your read and write operations. So once you've created, updated, or deleted entities like pipelines, linked services, and datasets 50,000 times, you're paying 50 cents. The other part is monitoring. So if you're like me and you get kind of impatient and you click on that refresh button to see while things are running or debugging, if you do that 50,000 times, you'll pay 25 cents. So it's fairly cheap. Inside of Azure Synapse, it's actually a little better because the first 1 million operations are free. Yay! Probably because they want you to spend all your money on the other parts of Synapse, but that's a different lightning talk. After that, you're going to pay 25 cents for the next 50,000 operations. So if this becomes a big cost issue to you, you're probably spending more on everything else, so the cost is fairly trivial relative to that anyway. The second part gets a little bit more complicated. When we get to orchestration and execution, there are a couple of things that you need to be aware of. So the first is that the price depends on which integration runtime you're using. So you'll see different numbers depending on the integration runtime. And this might affect your choice in which integration runtime to use. The first subcategory here is orchestration. The price here is listed per 1,000 runs, but you can easily change that to look at the cost per run. And that means each activity, each debug run, and each trigger execution has a small cost attached to it. The second subcategory is data movement, or the copy data activity. Prices here are listed per DIU hour. And what does that mean? If we look at the copy data activity settings, we'll see that it kindly informs us that you will be charged the number of used DIUs, or data integration units, times the copy duration, times 25 cents per DIU hour. And that's all well and good, except for this default setting here that says auto. Do you know how many data integration units you will be using if you keep it at auto? You will be using at least 4. So it can scale up, but you will always use at least 4 data integration units, which is kind of interesting because the minimum number that you can set it to is 2. So this is something to keep in mind if you're developing, if you're testing, or if you have smaller workloads. Change the setting and you can cut the cost in half. It's a good tip right there. The third subcategory are the pipeline activities. So these are all the activities that you're running inside of your pipeline. Lookups, get metadata, deletes, and so on. And if you're looking at my screen right now and you're looking at the numbers listed there, you might notice one thing. If you're using the managed VNet integration runtime, you're paying 200 or 500 times as much as if you were using the other integration runtimes. And this actually gets worse if you're looking at external activities. So for example, running stored procedures in a SQL server or notebook in Spark. If you're using the managed VNet, you're paying 4,000 or 10,000 times as much as if you were using the other integration runtimes. So this is where you might want to look at networking, understand that a little bit better. Haney has a great session on networking here at Data Minutes, so you can watch the recording of that. Understand that and maybe set up a self-hosted integration runtime where you manage this yourself, unless you feel that it's worth it to just be able to click on Enable VNet and have Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse take care of that for you. but there is a cost attached to that, so just be aware of it. You don't want to get that surprise bill at the end of the month. If you're reading my screen, you can probably also see something at the bottom that says that all activities are prorated by the minute and rounded up. And this is important because this is for all of these activities that are listed per DIU hour or per hour. When we run a pipeline and we look at the output or we look at the logging, we will see the times listed as minutes and seconds, the actual duration that it took to run that pipeline. But if we click on View Debug Consumption and look at the numbers there, they're different. So now they're listed in quantities and units that are what we base the billing off of. And if you're really good at math here, you can quickly see that anything that runs below 1 minute in just seconds is being rounded up to 1 minute. And the same thing, the activity that ran for 1 minute and 6 seconds is being rounded up to 2 minutes. So you're paying per minute, even if your pipeline is running for just a couple of seconds. So that's also important to know how that is affecting the bill at the end of the month. The third part are the data flows, and these can be expensive, but they can also be worth it for the right use cases. In this case, you have two different settings. You can choose the basic or general purpose data flows, or the standard or memory optimized. The cost here is not very different, but the memory optimized is slightly more expensive. But we see the same thing here. We see that all activities are prorated by the minute and rounded up. So you're always paying for at least 1 minute and in 1 minute increments. And there's one more thing to know about the data flows, and that is that the minimum cluster size is 8 vCores. So while the price that you see here now is listed per vCore hour, when we create these data flow runtimes, the minimum that we can choose is 4 plus 4, 8 vCores, or we can scale it up to 256 plus 16. So instead of looking at the cost per vCore hour, we have to multiply that with the number of cores that we're actually using, and we can see that the real cost is a little over $2 per hour. And if you have money to burn, this is an excellent way to do that. Just scale it all the way up and you can get rid of all your money in one day. So excellent tip there if you're super rich and you don't know what to do with your money. So a couple of lessons learned. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And my point here is always use the right tool for the right job. So if we look at pipelines in Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse Analytics, something like what you see here, lookup, copy, stored procedures, it's a very simple pipeline, and the cost of this might be around 5 cents. If we run that pipeline once every day for 30 days, it's going to cost us $1.59, which is still fairly cheap. If we start running this for many tables, so maybe we want to run it for 100 tables every night, the cost is starting to go up a little bit. And this might still be completely fine for you, might be within your budget. But if you start doing more frequent loads, small batches very frequently, you might want to look into other alternatives. Because if we start running this every hour, we're looking at $3,800 plus. And if we start looking at micro batches, if you try to run this in Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse Analytics every 5 minutes, again, if you have money to burn, go ahead and do that. Otherwise, I would look at other services. So again, just because you can doesn't mean you should. With pipelines, everything has a price, from the clicks that you do to the operations that you're running, and you just need to be aware of that because we as developers, we need to understand this pricing model to create solutions that are optimized not only for performance, but also for cost. So previous best practices that we may have been used to might not apply in this case. So make sure that you understand it. So instead of saying, I guess we just have to wait for the invoice, don't do that. Go check out the calculator and deliver those estimates with confidence to your project manager. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to have a chat about pricing or anything else in Azure Data Factory or Azure Synapse Analytics after this session.